Assalamualaikum and good morning everyone. Welcome to KRI's webinar, Rich Places, Poor Places, Managing the Realities of Neighbourhoods. My name is Marjan. I'm a researcher at KRI and it is my pleasure to be your moderator for today. Let me begin this webinar by giving a brief introduction about KRI as well as our esteemed panelists. The Khazanah Research Institute is a policy-based think tank that carries out research on pressing issues of the nation. We are a non-for-profit organization that is incorporated in 2014 that is funded by Yayasan Khazanah. Since then, KRI has published a number of reports on multiple areas ranging from housing, social protection, digitalization, labor wage policies, and more recently on climate. Today, I am pleased to introduce our esteemed panelists for this webinar. To my left, we have Hiba, Greg, Adam, and Dr. Suraya. Today's discussion will focus on how prosperous neighbourhoods are distinguished by their levels of place differentiation. Much of what we will be discussing today stems from our published report, Residential Settlements and Spatial Inequality, a study of Greater Kuala Lumpur neighbourhoods. Sorry, hang on. Let me go to the next slide. So here, this is the report that was published last year. For your convenience, we have included the QR code for you to scan and access the report. So throughout this presentation, if you have any questions for us, feel free to give your questions in the Q&A section in Zoom or comment in Facebook. With that, let's begin our webinar. So we know that there are quote-unquote rich places, poor places. Perhaps one of Malaysia's success story, the Greater Kuala Lumpur conurbation, is often lauded for being prosperous, productive, and competitive. So my first question to Tiba, can you share with us on why exactly is Greater Kuala Lumpur thriving and perhaps the policies that have developed such economies?
Thank you, Marjan. Yes, today I'll be sharing some of the developments of GKL conurbations and agglomeration economies as a reason for GKL to thrive. So, the share of population in GKL has been rising since 1970. More Malaysians, and particularly more higher income households, live in GKL. In 2020, it recorded a population share of nearly 32% compared to 20% 4 decades ago. And the estimated population is 10.4 million in 2020. And it's nearly 2 times the size of population in Singapore. In fact, states that forms GKL conurbation, Kuala Lumpur, Selangor, and Putrajaya, also emerge as top densely populated states. And more people are migrating to towns and cities in GKL to benefit from the opportunity it presents in terms of good jobs, income, education, and healthcare services, amongst others. I would also like to highlight here that the definition of GKL used in our study involves the whole of 4 states, KL, Selangor, Putrajaya, and Negeri Sembilan, because there is some ambiguity in the definition of GKL and also an absence of a comprehensive origin-destination study to identify the exact boundaries. So nearly 57% of T20 households reside in GKL. And 3 key states of GKL, KL, Selangor, and Putrajaya, emerged as the states with the highest median household income in 2019. And half of GKL households earn approximately 1.5 times the median income of a Malaysian household. The fact that more than 50% of T20 households live in one conurbation suggests that GKL conurbation features the desirable characteristics that enable rich people benefit by staying here, like closer to good jobs, amenities like shopping malls, cafes, and wellness centers, which also stimulate social capital or the social interaction among residents. I'll be explaining about this later. GKL conurbation is one of the prosperous conurbations in Malaysia, besides other regional conurbations like Greater Penang and South Johor conurbation. It's a major economic powerhouse, the prime location for more than 1/3 of the businesses in both construction and services sector. It's also known as commercial and financial hub, supporting many domestic and international companies. The growth of KL City into the massive Greater Kuala Lumpur conurbation that we see today can be attributed to several factors, including the concentration of high value-added industries, supportive government policies, and good infrastructure. And this transformation is the proof of a significant benefits of agglomeration economies. And in urban economics literature, it is highlighted that being clustered together geographically is a crucial factor that gives cities an economic edge and helps them to thrive. So what is an agglomeration economy? It refers to the benefits derived when firms and people co-locate together. So when they are closer to each other, they become productive and efficient because they can take advantage of the economies of scale, which facilitates the formation of agglomeration economies. So what are the factors that drives agglomeration economies? There are three main drivers. The first is lower transportation costs. When firms are closer to their suppliers and customers, it's cheaper to move things around. And when transportation cost is lower in a particular area, it acts as a pull factor for other companies to locate there. And along with adequate infrastructures, that particular area can become a hotspot for businesses. Take Shah Alam, for example. Many manufacturing companies are concentrated there due to its strategic location, being closer to major ports like Port Klang and also Subang Airport. And with well-connected expressways like Casas and NKVE, this proximity is convenient for the companies to transport their products. However, as transportation technology has advanced over the years, now with more modern transport modes, it is cheaper to move goods over long distance, but the cost of moving people and ideas are still high, which brings us to the next two drivers. In today's world, the main factors that make cities attractive are the availability of skilled workers and the exchange of ideas. The skilled workers are always in demand and they tend to gather in cities where they can find specialized jobs. This is what we call as the labor market pool. Think of a city as a job market where many different employers and workers meet. So this concentration of businesses and workers enables the workers, and it's easier for workers to find the right job that matches their skills and pay them well. And if they're not happy, they can easily switch to a better one because there are many options available. Likewise, for businesses, they benefit from a more diverse labor pool. So it is cheaper for them to find the right workers with cheaper cost and also quicker time. So cities are places where both workers and businesses can find the best opportunities and learn from each other, leading to increased productivity. The third driver is knowledge spillovers. Knowledge spillovers are generated when ideas and knowledge are shared easily among people, which helps businesses and industries to grow. So knowledge is a public good. So unless patented, it is free and can be shared with others, and this sharing is what we call as the knowledge diffusion. And closer proximity enables quicker knowledge diffusion. Imagine if your neighbor shared their secret recipes with you, and you learn the new dishes quickly. And the same goes for businesses and peoples. When they are close, they share ideas faster, which leads to more innovation and new discoveries. This is known as the spillover effect. But for spillover effects to occur, it's not just about being close together. We also need to build good relationship and trust with others. And this is what we call as social capital. It's like having a network of colleagues helping each other. And when you have social capital, knowledge flows more easily and everyone benefits. And there are two types of agglomeration economy. First is localization economies, the benefits derived from the co-location of similar firms. And the second one is urbanization economies, when the benefits derived through the co-location of diverse firms or from the diverse industries. Consider a street where you find all kinds of car services center like Nissan, Proton, Honda, like the one we see in section 13 PG. They are close to each other because it helps them to share the same suppliers and customers. So they benefit from localization economies. Now look at the surrounding areas like Section 14, universities and colleges like the Automotive College providing fresh graduates to these car companies. There are also places to eat, shop, and even hospitals like Columbia Asia. And all of these amenities benefit from being in the same area and what we will call as urbanization economies. So now let's look at the policies encouraging agglomeration economies in Malaysia. We have segmented into three: policies promoting industrial development, policies encouraging the creation of new urban centers, and policies to improve transportation networks. And policies for industrial growth included the first FTZ in Bayan Lepas, and which contributed to the creation of electronic and electrical cluster, and the success prompted the creation of 8 other FTZs. We also had Industrial Master Plan 1 and 2 helping different industries to grow, cluster-based development looking at textiles, chemical, and specialized clusters is not in knowledge-based economy like MSc and Technology Park Malaysia. And for policies to help build new towns and cities, there were creation of more satellite towns developed like Shah Alam, Kajang, Bangi, Sepang to spread the population growth from big cities to KL and from big cities like KL to neighboring cities. And policies to improve transportation network includes investments in major highways and expressways like Plus and KV, which enabled the growth of townships like Nilai and Bukit Berentong. So clusters of businesses can happen naturally, or what we call as a spontaneous clusters, mostly concentrated in Western countries. And the other type of cluster is known as policy-driven cluster. Clusters created through government policies, like in Malaysia, where a government provided incentives, infrastructure, and supports the formation of clusters that we see, like the ones in regional corridors. Here I discuss a case study of MSc to understand why sometimes policy-driven clusters might not work as it's expected to be. So MSc was designed to transition the country into a knowledge-based economy. It's a government-regulated corridor with well-established basic infrastructure and incentives like tax exemption and MSc status. Companies are free to hire anyone as long as they settle within the MSc boundaries. But it fallen short of initial expectations. Like between 1996 to 2005, 60% of the firms were located outside of the legal boundaries of MSc, and then there were lack of interactive relationship and networking. MSc was meant to be a Silicon Valley to develop R&D and innovative IT firms, but most companies over there focused on call centers and data processing activities, hindering the creation of a creative environment. And their lack of high-tech endowments for residence pattern, low absorptive capacity, and there was also lack of social amenities. Like for Cyberjaya was described as 9 to 5 city back then, where people come there just to work only. So there were like no residential center during the initial period, and prior to 2010, there was only one shopping mall in Putrajaya. So lack of amenities back then hindered the localized interaction of knowledge diffusion to happen. So policy-driven clusters, unlike natural ones, don't seem to offer the advantage of having knowledgeable workers or skilled workers within the clusters, at least in the short run. One reason is the low density of businesses and people in that area, like we see in the case of MSc, and fewer amenities and residential center to attract people to live there. So there was a challenge to facilitate the agglomeration process. Even Jan Jacob identifies the concentration of people as one of the crucial conditions for city diversity. So density is important, as well as pool of specialized workers and adequate infrastructure to help businesses grow and contribute to the growth of cities. I would like to end my presentation here. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Tiba. That's really interesting. So it means that you need a good mix of both economic activities as well as skilled labor force to boost local productivity growth, right? So moving on to the next question. So we know that it's important to have not just your basic amenities, but also additional amenities such as perhaps financial services, theatres, and cafes. So my next question to Greg, in the report, it adopts a methodology that measures the diversity of places in Greater Kuala Lumpur. Can you perhaps walk us through on how this place differentiation is done?
Thank you, Marjan. Thank you, Dina, as well, for the very comprehensive discussion on the agglomeration economies in Greater Kuala Lumpur. So in our study, we have focused so in our discussion today, we have focused so far on how the agglomeration of industry has led to the development of Greater Kuala Lumpur as a city. But now I would like to pivot this discussion and look at it from the perspective of households on what makes a good neighborhood to live in. And I suppose that relates somewhat to the soft infrastructure that was spoken about earlier. So in our connected world today, the notion of place goes beyond geographical coordinates. A prosperous neighborhood is one that encapsulates the essence of our daily experiences, such as the availability of essential services, the vibrancy of leisure options for the residents, and the accessibility of mobility hubs. So our research delves deep into understanding these nuances, and we aim to unravel the underlying patterns that sort of differentiates these neighborhoods. So I'd like to start this segment's discussion by drawing to your attention something that we are all most likely familiar with, and that is the Google Maps app that is on our phone. We either use Google Maps or Waze to travel, to help us with our travel from one place to another, right? So Google Maps makes locational intelligence sort of like a public good. If you have the desire to go to a place that you have never visited before, you can find out almost everything you need to know from Google Maps. So the app is sort of optimized so that every search query that is conducted on the platform yields useful information for its users. And these search queries on our part reflect our intent as users to get information about the place or our intent to actually travel to the place. So from here, we also know that places serve different functions for society. So we go to offices so that we can do work. We go to restaurants so that we can acquire food, we can eat, we can socialize with our friends, with our family. We go to malls to acquire groceries and maybe for leisure as well. We go to parks for exercise, for recreation, so on and so forth. So as we can see, these different places that we have that is distributed all over Greater Kuala Lumpur serve different, or rather they facilitate different types of human functioning. But in order to study places, one might wonder, what is the scale of our analysis? Are we studying the mukim, the daerah, or the state? In our study, we chose to study neighborhoods because we expect sufficient variation at the neighborhood level as opposed to the mukim level or the state level or even the daerah level. Also, because when it comes to our own spatial awareness about location, we functionally think in terms of neighborhoods. So for example, if I were to ask you, where did you have dinner on Sunday? It makes more sense to say something like, oh, I ate at Uptown, or I ate at Bukit Damansara, as opposed to saying, oh, I had dinner at daerah Segambut. So we don't think in terms of daerah, we think in terms of neighborhoods. And the same goes to the question of where do you stay. So, however, in order for our definition of neighborhoods to be more meaningful, we did not use the boundaries as provided in the maps. Instead, we included all places that is within a 3.5 kilometer radius from the center point of that particular neighborhood. And this decision to define a neighborhood as 3.5 kilometer radius along the centroid is informed by our previous study on PPRs. So in our PPR study, we asked residents where you go for work, where you go for leisure, where do you go to perform religious obligations and whatnot. And work might be different because people can travel 15 kilometers or even 20 plus kilometers to go to work. But when it comes to acquiring groceries, performing religious obligations, leisure, and whatnot, those are normally bound by 3.5 kilometers. And also for your information, 3.5 kilometers roughly correspond to a 7 to 15 minutes travel time. But one caveat that I would like to point out in our unit of analysis is that while it might make sense to use this unit of analysis in the city center, the further away you go from the city center, the more this definition becomes less meaningful, because I imagine in a more rural area, it makes more sense to travel further to do these things. Okay, so now that we have laid out the fundamental definitions that we employ and showed how we extract our data from Google Maps, next, in order to sort of like study the underlying structures of place differentiation, we sought to construct a matrix of place co-location probabilities, and this is what you can see on the left-hand side. We call this the Greater Kuala Lumpur Amenity Space after Hidalgo and Castaner. Essentially, this matrix captures the tendency for two places to co-locate in the same neighborhood. So for example, one would expect to see police stations, fire stations, post offices to have high co-location probabilities amongst one another, because these places serve basic and necessary functions of each neighborhood. So they are present in each neighborhood, and therefore they have high co-location probabilities. Now, the goal of doing this is actually to obtain a classification of place typologies without making any prior assumption on what function they serve. So the figure that you see on the far most right describes the clusters that form by applying Blondel's algorithm on our network model. In essence, the algorithm's goal is to assign the best group to each place based on how closely they are connected. Based on their co-location probabilities. And what we have found in this study is that this network exhibits an assortative ordered structure. To give a simplified description of what this means. So imagine your neighborhood as a vast social network of places. And just as friends with common interests tend to gravitate towards one another, places with similar functions cluster together. And this interconnectedness forms the basis of our study. So we can think of this as sort of like a digital 6 degrees of separation for places, a sort of mathematical tool to decipher latent structures behind the geographical landscape that we are familiar with. Once we have quantified this structure, the next step is to use this structure, that network, to summarize the level of place differentiation for each neighborhood, and conversely, the level of how rare or how common a place is in Greater Kuala Lumpur. So to do this, we again adopted the method of reflections by Hidalgo and Hausmann to assign an index for each neighborhood and each place. So the figure on the left represents the top 25 neighborhoods ranked by place differentiation, while the figure on the right represents the top 25 places ranked by how common or how rare they are in the whole Greater Kuala Lumpur region. And So as you can see, places the neighborhoods with high place differentiation are like Desa Pandan, Bukit Tumpu, Petaling Jaya, Taman Desa, and whatnot. While the places that are most rare or most uncommon are like zoos, LRT stations, probably because they're not in the more rural areas, physiotherapies, legal services, and whatnot. But what does all this mean? So at the end of the analysis, what we get is a geographical distribution of neighborhoods with varying place differentiation. So what we observe from our analysis is that the more diverse neighborhoods have the following type of amenities in their operating environment. For services, they have legal services, physiotherapy, financial services, beauty salons. For leisure, casinos. One might wonder, what does casinos mean? Casinos basically refer to the lottery shops that you can see the lottery shops in the shop lots. Bowling alleys, art galleries, movie theaters, zoo. Consumption, you have bookstores, liquor stores, shoe stores, department stores. And for mobility at the LRT stations, LRT stations here is all encompassing. So it is LRT, MRT, as well as KTM, taxi stations, and an airport. While the less diverse neighborhoods have a different set of operating environment. So we can see that the less diverse neighborhoods are mainly made out of medical services, moving companies, storage companies, open parks, public libraries, etc., and so on and so forth. What I would note here, however, is that the amenities that you see in these less diverse neighborhoods are also present in the more diverse neighborhoods. So the more diverse neighborhoods have a lot more, while the less diverse neighborhoods sort of have the basic amenities that they require to function as a neighborhood, so to speak. And what is the relevance of this finding? So picture a bustling neighborhood that boasts an array of services, leisure activities, and convenient transport options. Place differentiation represents the availability of freedoms for the people living in these neighborhoods to sort of materialize the various freedoms and functionings that they might want to have. The vibrant diversity of places doesn't just add color to the community, it directly corresponds to the quality, the ability for you to have quality living. Residents in neighborhoods with such comprehensive amenities experience a richer and a more convenient lifestyle. On the other hand, the areas where these amenities are scarce would result in a situation where residents face challenges in getting this well-rounded experience that is more prevalent in the more diverse neighborhoods. Next, this slide represents the applied side of our research. So we think that the model that we have generated, the model that we have created called the Greater Kuala Lumpur Amenity Space, can be used as one of the various data-driven decision filters that can aid local councils, developers, as well as residents map out their desired developments. So we ran a few regressions to explore the relationship between place differentiation and incomes, population density, house prices, and whatnot. And we have found in our analysis that place differentiation is strongly correlated with population density, more so than income, which seems to be in line with what we've gotten from the literature on urban development. We envision that the Greater Kuala Lumpur Amenity Space can be used in several ways. So first, it can be used as a descriptive tool to sort of describe the characteristics of a neighborhood. Then secondly, it can also be used as a predictive tool to predict what types of places might feature more given an influx of population that moves into this neighborhood. So I imagine that this information might be useful for various aspects of planning. And we also imagine that this model might help contribute to a larger conversation of what residents themselves say what they want in their neighborhood. And so that concludes our discussion so far with regards to place differentiation. Next, we will move on to housing.
All right, so thanks, Greg, for enlightening us and as well as adding color on how we can view our cities and neighborhoods, as well as showing us on how the GKL amenity space can be a useful instrument in city planning. Sorry. With that, I would like to remind our audience once again to submit your questions in Zoom and Facebook, and we will address them during Q&A. Coming back to our next question, in addition to the diversity of amenities, what about housing? So my question to Adam is isn't housing another core defining feature of neighborhoods and spatial inequality? You know, people often talk about issues of unaffordability. Is there a supply and demand mismatch in GKL? Why, and what are the possible policy implications?
Thank you, Marjan. Yes, you're right. Certainly, housing is a core feature of prosperous neighborhoods and ultimately the cities that they make up. And ideally, people would prefer to stay in housing that is of good quality with no issues of maintenance or security, for example. But in addition to houses serving as shelter, I would say that they also are important in serving as an anchor point for people to move from place to place to access jobs or amenities, like Greg mentioned, and ultimately interact with one another as communities and exchange ideas. And yes, there is an overhang issue in Greater Kuala Lumpur. which suggests that there's a supply and demand mismatch, meaning there's an oversupply of houses which are built, but they remain unsold. So in the 4 states that make up GKL, unsurprisingly, unsold units are a lot more prominent in KL and Selangor itself. It's less so in Putrajaya and Negeri Sembilan. But if you look at it as a share of total units launched, which is lower in Putrajaya and Negeri Sembilan, the concentration of unsold units is also a bit high in Putrajaya as well. And if we look at it across the price range, we do see some unsold units throughout the distribution. But in KL and Selangor specifically, it is prominent around the lower price range, as well as the above 1 million mark. In terms of where the overhang is located or concentrated, it is unsurprisingly in KL itself, the state boundaries, and it is less so in the periphery areas based on this mapping of the number of overhang units by administrative district. But if we compare the number of overhang units against the incoming supply of houses in each unit, the periphery areas also seem to have an overhang issue. So it suggests that the overhang issue is not just an issue of price, but also location. And but going back to prices, many of us know that it has greatly increased, and this can be seen in the house price index, which shows a steep increase from 2010 to 2017. Afterwards, it has moderated, the escalation has moderated, but we know that and feel that prices do remain unaffordable relative to the incomes that we have. And this can be seen in the median multiple measure that KRI has been referring to a lot, which compares the median house prices against the median annual household income. So generally, a multiple of 3 is or below is considered affordable. Anything above that is not. So we see in this measure that the median multiple has spiked from 2012 to 2014 and has reduced, but it's still above 3. So for generally, the housing market is considered unaffordable. And last I checked, based on recent statistics for 2022, the median multiple has usually gone back up to about 4.3. And I would like to point out that the median multiple is a bit lower in KL and Selangor, but that's mainly because household incomes there are among the highest. But actually, house prices there are actually the highest. So it in a way does push the less well-off people outside of these states. So let's zoom in on transactions for the past few years before COVID, specifically 2015 to 2019. This period, I believe, is when price escalation has moderated. So whatever transactions that we see is less about speculation. It's more about the fundamental values of houses. And in the sub-sale market specifically, we do see that the general increase in house prices is reflected in a market that I would say is somewhat polarized, at least in KL and Selangor. And if we look at on the left-hand side for non-landed housing, transactions in KL priced at around 100 to 700K are quite high, but so are houses at the top end, above 1 million. In Selangor, transactions are mainly at the lower end. But if you look on the right for landed housing, transactions in KL are entirely at the top end for above 1 million. For Selangor, it's a bit on both ends, at the lower and top. As for the types of housing that are transacted in GKL, I would say there's nearly, based on the transactions, there are nearly as many non-landed housing as there are landed now. And for landed housing specifically, in terms of the specific types, it's mostly terrace houses. But for non-landed, it's a bit more evenly distributed between apartments, condos, and flats. But also service residences, they're actually quite common, actually even more so than number of units transacted with our semi-Ds or bungalows. And in terms of how big these units are, in terms of the number of rooms, landed houses are, of course, unsurprisingly, they have more rooms, but between the non-landed house types. We see that one-room service residents are a lot more common. And we also do find in further analysis that service residents, they're a lot more expensive for each of their size categories. As for the location, think about how these houses are, how far they are to the city center of Kuala Lumpur. We do see that there are more transactions for non-landed housing, which are closer to the center compared to landed housing. And if we focus on non-landed specifically from the top table, we see that there are a lot of transactions within the 3 to 9 kilometer distance range away from KL city center. And these are especially priced around 100 to 500,000 ringgit. And if you look at it, if you compare that same transactions in terms of what their sizing are, look at the table below, you see that most of these they tend to be 600 to 1,000 square feet. And focusing our attention at the top end, housing above 1 million ringgit, there are a lot of transactions there. But they also tend to be closer to the city center as well as being larger. Focusing on the more affordable end for housing below 400,000 ringgit, which is considered a bit more affordable based on 3 times KL median income. We actually find that about 40% of them are smaller than the national housing standard of 800 square feet for a 3-bedroom unit. And this is something that should be of a concern. So, given the overhang issue and the nature of transactions, what do we Malaysians actually value in housing, and how do we make better sense of the data that I showed just now? For this, we can use the hedonic price model, which is a statistical model, to investigate how house prices vary based on the inherent attributes of each house. So based on this model, house prices are determined as a function of their structural, neighborhood, and locational attributes. So for each attribute, the model estimates how much price changes, for example, with the size of a house or whatever other feature. And we do this based on the actual individual transactions in the sub-sale market. And this data is from BRICS, and it has information on key attributes of each transacted house. And since we have the address of each transacted house, we can relate this to other geographical data, including our amenities data set from Google Maps, which Greg showed. So as houses and their attributes will differ from house to house, the transacted price, I believe, is a strong indicator of what people value, and their willingness to pay for these attributes. And I think this signal holds quite strong, perhaps even stronger, in the sub-sale market, as these houses, they're already in the market, they've already been built, and they can be properly assessed by people. Unlike in the new launches market, where people are taking a risk to buy something that isn't even built yet, and once these houses are delivered, maybe who knows, they might actually reduce in value, or they might not have appreciated as much as they expect. So these are the variables that we test to see how they correlate with price. Of course, there are many other variables, but based on our reading of other studies globally, these are the attributes that matter most for the general market. And by general market, I mean houses below 1 million ringgit, because I think above this price, I think many other factors will come into play. And there is no doubt that even depending on the specific question you may have, you could add more variables. But as far as our model is concerned, the results, they're mostly as expected. But there are a few interesting observations, two specifically that I want to highlight. The first is that although unit size is correlated with higher prices, increasing the number of rooms does not, if we hold other factors constant. So this suggests that building houses with more rooms without an accompanying increase in unit size results in less usable space for home buyers, which they do not prefer. And we also do find that the presence of luxury service residents, where many are studios or they only have one room, it's something that skews this relationship. The second finding to highlight is the effect of low-cost housing on nearby property prices. And the numbers show that the further away you are from low-cost housing, the higher the house price. In other words, being close to a low-cost house correlates with lower prices. And this suggests a NIMBY effect, or not in my backyard kind of behavior, where people are against the close presence of low-cost housing or its associated features. And it is likely that this relates to their deteriorating conditions because of maintenance challenges. And actually over here, we show the effect of private low-cost housing. And in a separate test, we don't find any effect for government-managed low-cost housing, for example, PPRs. And it suggests that PPRs are generally in better condition, better maintained, and it's somewhat expected as the government, they do have some maintenance responsibility, unlike for the private low-cost housing market. So what are the policy implications to what I just presented? Well, the first is to do with housing standards itself. As I shared earlier, it seems that usable space is something that we value, but it does come in at a premium. And because of this premium, we do see that a lot of what is transacted at the more affordable range is smaller than our standards, or the national housing standards. And besides the space itself, the actual conditions of housing, especially private low-cost housing, is also something that is a concern. So therefore, following our previous research as well, we recommend developing a good quality housing standard to ensure decent living for all. And key to this is a national housing survey needed to identify the qualitative gaps in existing conditions, as well as standards that represent what our people desire based on their specific household needs. The second implication relates more to addressing the conditions of low-cost housing itself in the private market. And that is to revisit the low-cost housing quota. And this recommendation is premised also on the need for a clearer demarcation between the private and the social housing sector as well as the private market. Presently, some of you would know that in many states in Malaysia, governments via local councils, they would impose on private developers to allocate about 30%, depending on the state, 30% of their housing demand for low cost or affordable housing. However, we believe and find that low-cost housing built by the private sector, they may turn into urban slums, more so likely than government low-cost housing. And this is because developers, when they try to deliver these houses, which are expected to be as low as 42,000 ringgit, they're more likely to have to lower construction standards. And the issue is further compounded worsened when the maintenance burden and ownership responsibility is passed wholly the maintenance responsibility of these low quality buildings, they pass wholly to the poor and vulnerable. And this is unlike the social housing sector, i.e. PPRs, which are managed by the government. And so we believe that shelter for the poor, even if it's built by the private sector, it should have a management strategy that is similar to the social housing sector. Right now, there isn't even any. And inevitably, public funds must be set aside for their maintenance. I would like also to raise the point that there is a model perception that low-cost housing is the affordable housing quota. I would say that this is not true. The affordability problem for houses by the poor is mostly an issue of poverty. Therefore, it must be addressed by poverty alleviation strategies rather than just building homes at the lowest cost for the sake of ownership. So the low-cost housing quota should be reviewed, and perhaps we should exempt developers who are already building homes that can be considered affordable to the general market based on the 3 times median income rule. So to conclude, the 2 policy implications I touched on, they relate to a bigger picture or wider vision for housing policy in Malaysia, which touches both on the social and market sector. So the social sector is meant for the poor and vulnerable who cannot afford houses that are of decent standard in the private market. And this social sector is where the government, they provide funding and also do the maintenance and whatever other management responsibilities. And also in core urban areas like in GKL, where dense high rises are prominent, along with their own set of maintenance challenges. We should not expect the poor to own these houses. They should be expected to only rent, because the responsibility of ownership may at the end burden them. And ultimately, we should seek to graduate these people into the private market when they are better off. And this is because we believe that the private market is the sector which should cater to most of housing demand in Malaysia. By providing houses that are affordable based on the people that we have and the incomes that we earn, not just for a tiny segment of society. So the government should not be buffering market failures by trying to build homes themselves, because it's quite likely that it's not sustainable fiscally and quite impossible, and it will result in long housing queues for people with no guarantee of decent standards. And so what the government should be doing is doing the regulation to ensure that the market is competitive and whatever speculation there is minimized. So I would like to end here. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Thank you for reminding us the importance of raising housing standards as well as reviewing the low-cost housing quota. I also think it's especially interesting in your policy framework that you shared. So ideally, social housing residents should move to the private market once they're better off financially. So my next question to Hiba, do you actually see this happening where residents in social housing actually move into the private market?
Okay, thank you, Marjan. So yes, we did a study on our PPRs in KL to examine the key issues in the living experiences in residents and the management of the social housing sector. So some of the findings include most of the PPR residents are long-time residents. About 80% of them are living in PPR for at least 5 years. And more than half are renters, around 69%. More than 60% of households earn less than the poverty line income of 2,208 ringgit. And 70% of PPR residents in KL were ordered to relocate for development purposes. So this means that they didn't move into PPR because of low income or what, but basically because their places were taken for redevelopment. Most relocations occurred within the 5 kilometer of their previous location, which allowed PPR residents to maintain their jobs. And PPR residents' socio-economic contribution also concentrated mostly in places and amenities situated within a close vicinity of the complex. And the rental amount of PPR unit remained at 124 ringgit since 1998. Meanwhile, house prices have escalated rapidly between 2009 and 2019. So unless PPR residents have a income raised above the CAGR of 6.26%, then they would find it difficult to find options in the private market. And using a basic needs graduation threshold, we found out that 26% of the tenants are potentially maybe ready to graduate from social housing. So we analyzed what are their options and constraints to exit social housing. So for this analysis, we collaborated with Inspan to conduct a market rental study in private housing schemes nearby the PPRs in our case study. So the table shows the number of private rental options by price range and distance to current PPR. There are only a few affordable private rental options are available for PPR graduates who wish to exit social housing. If we raise the rental, if for rental less than 500 ringgit per month, fewer than 3 housing options are available for PPRs and they are located within 5 kilometers. And if we raise the rental amount above 500 to 1,000 ringgit, there are more choices. PPR Wagyu and Bringin have about 14 schemes, but they tend to be expensive, and this means that PPR residents have to accept a rental amount between 2 to 7 times their existing rental. Plus, some of these options are located more than 5 kilometers away. And we have to take note that graduation from social housing should not require PPR households to relocate further away from their existing socio-economic environment, which means the places they work, schools the children attend, and amenities that they frequent. And they should be enjoying the same level of accessibility and positive living environment when they move into their new place. So apart from rental, we also looked at the transacted residential units in the secondary market which appears to be unfavorable for prospective PPR graduates. So the top diagram shows proportion of residential transactions by price range, and the bottom one shows by type of housing. And our findings shows that using the median multiple indicator, affordable housing options are limited to flats, apartments, and cluster homes. And they are also much smaller than the size of a PPR unit of 700 square feet. Earlier, Adam showed that 40% of housing in the affordable category are below than the national housing standard for a 3-bedroom unit. So for more space means households need to pay higher house prices beyond what they can afford. And if they opt for cheaper options, cheaper housing or rental, then there's a possibility that they reside in low quality and low standards private low-cost housing. And in earlier presentation by Adam, we know that private low-cost housing have issues with poor maintenance and quality, and most likely the residents will need to live in deteriorated building conditions, making it worse for them. And when it comes to owning PPR homes, there are some restrictions. These units are sold from 35,000 to 42,000 ringgit, with certain restrictions like a 10-year moratorium and a caveat lodged against its sale in the free market. And this is a common practice in asset-based welfare, where homes allocated for social purposes should stay within the system for future use. So, and it also means that if PPR homeowners won't benefit from any increase in property prices that might occur in the open market if they want to sell their units later on. And we also asked the residents, would they prefer, would they exit from social housing given to move to other government-assisted housing projects or private housing given the opportunity? And most of the PPR residents said that they prefer to stay in social housing. And some of them said they will move depending on factors such as new rental rate, new location, new housing features, and two other housing administrator. And it's also obvious that since the options outside social sector are smaller in size, limited selections of flats and cluster homes, and high rental rate, this might hinder the eligible PPR tenants who graduate from social housing and then climbing up their property ladder. Plus, maintenance in public low-cost housing is being taken care of by local authorities, although there are issues with the lack of scheduled maintenance, but there is a designated agency to look after government's low-cost housing, the maintenance. Hence why the NIMBY effect for government low-cost housing is lower than the private sector. But in the private sector, sometimes it depends. If their JMB is very active, then they can look after maintenance, but most likely, like, it's a low cost, right? So they may not have enough fund to maintain their maintenance costs. And in our report, we also propose some of the policy options to address these issues. So policies to manage PPR households as well as private housing stock. So for households, we recommend a filtration criteria that accounts for household size. Currently, it is tied to income criteria of 3,000 ringgit regardless of size of household. We also propose to create exit strategies for households who are no longer eligible to stay in PPRs. We have seen that the rental prices are higher in the market rental study that we did. So giving a housing allowance or voucher can expand housing options for the households and encourage them to exit social housing. But this has to be accompanied with Rental Tenancy Act as a safeguard measure against possibilities of landlords raising the rental in response to government's housing voucher. and also to encourage integrated housing experiences to prevent the segregation of low-income households and incentivize private markets to provide affordable rents. And we also need measures to manage private housing stock to ensure that they are adequate, affordable, and available in good conditions for social housing tenants as they transit from social sector to private sector. And this includes conducting a national housing survey, populate housing registry, to assess and inspect building condition via building condition survey, to set up an integrated rental database to capture both supply and rental rates of the private rental market, and to monitor the general affordability of housing prices and rents. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tiba. I agree. It is important to manage both social housing and private housing so that everyone can have access to decent housing shelter. Before we begin for the next one, I would just like to remind our audience once again, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them in our Zoom Q&A or Facebook comment. So to the last one, but not least, I would now like to invite Dr. Suraya to perhaps share her insights on housing, cities, and regional development in Malaysia.
Thank you, Tiba. Thank you very much. We have performed the analysis of Greater KL with regards to understanding residential settlements and spatial inequities or spatial inequality in terms of quote-unquote rich neighborhood and quote-unquote poor neighborhood by two proxies. This is what we've seen from this webinar. One is amenities and two is housing. This is because though agglomeration economies is about firms and people co-locating together, people are drawn to a higher expectation of better living standards, and therefore amenities and housing play that role. So it is very important to understand the phenomenon by looking at these two proxies, amenities and housing. Now, in terms of amenities, I'll go into both amenities and housing, and then I'll give my final conclusion. In terms of amenities, the Greater KL, to begin with, as Tiba mentioned, reflects the types of rich and poor neighborhoods that are outcomes of local economic development, be it policy-driven or in terms of historical development. But more interestingly, what this team has done, which is the Greater KL amenity space, the first in the country ever done at a neighborhood level. Even though it's a snapshot, hopefully we can do more, or other people who are looking at us now can do this analysis as well. It's in our book. You can look at it. We can see the progress of a less developed neighborhood to a more developed neighborhood to see what could be better. But it also can show that there is a potential to project the outcomes of amenities of what's next in the neighborhood. Why is this important? Because one is about social mobility gains. As mentioned by Greg just now, if you have different or varied types of amenities, these are things that could increase your social mobility. If you have a neighborhood that has more tuition centers, this would then increase the social mobility of that community. So these spatial inequities sometimes create these inequalities, and this is why we did this study in order to prevent certain neighborhoods of always becoming less diversified. But at the same time, this diversification or differentiation of neighborhood also makes Kuala Lumpur or Greater Kuala Lumpur inclusive. Because if you look at other countries in the world or other cities in the world, once a country becomes more developed, the cities become more developed, sometimes it is too expensive for the poor and vulnerable to be part of that community. But as we have seen in Greater KL, it is still there. The poor and the rich could coexist together. Of course, there is a lot of government intervention. There is a lot of help from the private sector. And that's why we went into housing. Now, housing is very interesting. So in order to help the poor, we have two schemes from the private sector and the public sector going for PPR, and the private sector gives low-cost housing. What we have found out, so these are very noble intention, but what we have found out is that houses built by the private sector under the low-cost quota is creating urban slums more than the PPR created by the government. I think that's a very important point to make, and it's backed by evidence. It also has, for the private sector, it also has private sector provisioning of low-cost housing. It also has a NIMBY effect, not behind my neighborhood effect, whereby it actually impacted house prices of the surrounding area. So this is a very important point to take by both private and public, to understand that certain initiatives that we do have an impact on local economic development as well as housing and amenities. It weakens it. That's the main point. So in that sense, we do believe that the evidence from these studies could help in the application or the creation of better policies for neighborhoods, because now you have a method in which you can actually map the progression as well as the outcome of local economic development. I think I shall stop there, Marjan, because I think we see a lot of questions, and let's try and engage more and share our discussion today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Suraya. That was very insightful. So now to the anticipated section in the end, the Q&A. We will now begin the Q&A section. As a reminder again, if you want to submit questions, please do so in the Q&A section in Zoom, or you can comment them on Facebook. So I am opening up the questions here. So the first one from Hui Ling Yao. So the question is, Cyberjaya was supposed to be one of this cluster, but it seems to have yet reached its full potential. What are your thoughts?
I can take that question. So the issue with Cyberjaya for the selection of MSE, in my opinion, I think it's the location factor, because agglomeration economy is already occurring in KL, Kuala Lumpur City Centre. So they already have like an accumulation of IT firms over there, and they have their clients and customers over there. So when they move the entire like they want to build the new agglomeration of IT firms or innovative firms in Cyberjaya, right? So I think the location, and also initially they struggled with infrastructure issues as well. Like they were lack of social amenities to encourage people to come and stay there and work, not to come to just work and go back to KL, but to come and stay there and also work. So in my opinion, it's about location and also infrastructure issues.
I see. Okay, so I will move on to the next one. There's two questions related to the definition of GKL, so I think I'll combine it both together. So from Anonymous, why do you define GKL as including all of Selangor and Negeri Sembilan? Surely some parts of Selangor and Negeri Sembilan are still rural. Why not adopt EPU's definition? The second one, by Chi Hong Fu, the definition of Klang Valley includes district of Gombak, Petaling, Hulu Langat, and Klang, while Greater KL under the definition of EPP is Klang Valley plus district of Sepang.
I'd like to take a question if you don't mind. So when we started this analysis, we wanted to have a definition of Greater Kuala Lumpur that is functional. So we did a literature review on all the policy documents, and yes, the definition of GKL by Pemandu in 2010 as well as by SPAT in 2011 is as mentioned in in this question over here. However, over time, when we were doing Dasar Perumahan Negara as well as other projects, we had a lot of focus groups discussions with even local councils, and one of the things that we discovered is that there is a lot. Recently there is an increase in travel or mobilities coming from Putrajaya to Kuala Lumpur, or even Seremban to Kuala Lumpur. And given that is the case, we think that Seremban ought to be included in the definition of GKL. But at the end of the day, in the absence of a comprehensive origin and destination study, it is quite difficult to tell what is the true boundary of GKL. And that is why we err on the side of caution, and we include a greater area than necessary. but surely there is room to improve this definition if we had an origin destination study.
I'd like to just add to that. Even if we have the boundaries, exact boundaries, to not include all of Negeri Sembilan or Selangor, there is also a data issue. Maybe not for the data that we use, because we do have like the individual housing data and basis, but for many other data that is published by DOS, a lot of it is still at most down to the district or even state level. So moving forward, there should be a lot more data, public data that is published within these specific boundaries, rather than just state level or even district level, which is still too big.
Okay. So we see here that there are some raised hands. Unfortunately, we're only limiting questions that are typed in Zoom or Facebook comments. So appreciate it if you can just put it in text box here. So I'll go to the next question by Pui Ling Yang again. So recently, the Prime Minister announced the Residency Prihatin Madani initiative. Would this help to ensure sustainable housing? Anyone would like to take this?
Yeah, maybe I can start first. Yeah, from what I've seen, it seems that this initiative is for the M40. So I mean, I do applaud their efforts in trying to intervene in the market, to make sure that there is housing for the general segment of the population. But I mean, going back to what I've discussed or mentioned before, the government, they should also have other initiatives to make the general market, the general private market, affordable as well, because yeah, it seems that there's only about 1,000 units launched under this scheme, and 1,000 I would say is not much in the grander scheme of things. I think in one of my slides I showed the transactions for housing within the 300K range, and it's in the like 5 digits. So 1,000 relative to that, it's not much. So there's a lot of unmet housing demand, which is unmet. Yeah. So I don't think that this building homes and the government building homes themselves is something that they could keep with. So and the price range the eligibility range for these housings, it's up to the M40, meaning it's just below T20, and I think it's quite a big yeah, it's targeting like 80% of the population, and I think that's quite an ambitious target. So they need other things to make sure that the private market works.
Okay, so I will move on to the next one. So here we have a question by Anonymous. What should the government do to address overhang, vacancy tax, or further open the market to foreigners?
Okay, maybe I can start first
and then I'll end with the foreigners.
Okay. Okay. So in a recent statistics by Dawson, we got to know that there are like 1.8 million of units found to be vacant, right? And about 700K units remain unoccupied, either due to being newly completed or intended for rental or sale. So when with many vacant units and also the overhang units, and people are buying these units for speculation activities, or like they are just hoarding the units to earn quicker profits, and this deprive others of the opportunities to purchase or rent them. And it also represents wasteful resources and have adverse effects on resource utilization and neighborhood development. So, for example, in a particular neighborhood, they have brought in public infrastructures or like transport services or public parks, and when a lot of units are vacant over there and there's no like enough sufficient population over there, then this leads to underutilization of public resources, and they are not being used as a full potential for the targeted population because they haven't moved in. And also a lot of like empty units will also lead to disinvestment in townships and discouraging businesses to invest in that particular neighborhood. So in my opinion, like or even we are in fact we are gonna really come up with views on why we are proposing for vacancy tax for both developers and as well as the individuals who purchase those units. So it is okay to implement vacancy tax.
If I may add on the next suggestion by the person here, anonymous, to further open the market to foreigners. If you look at the overhang numbers by the ones given by Adam just now, for those that are for 800 or more than 1 million, the standards are higher, the quality is better. And therefore, if you start building or supplying homes of good standard, of good quality to foreign buyers, that means the opportunity cost is that our own local people who generate the GDP of our country will not be able to get good quality housing standards. Now, this is a real problem here because a lot of discussion around the world, of course, is speaking about how do we ensure that people who work here, live here, and generate the GDP for our country benefits from the amenities and housing that are of good standards in our own country. If we start opening high income, the more nicer products, and with, of course, a bit more expensive, to foreign buyers whose money now is quite strong, then therefore our own people will not be able to enjoy good quality housing standards or homes. This will then create a backlash, or really open the gates of basically more of our good products only enjoyed by foreign buyers. And I think this will have rapid price escalation impact on the local domestic housing, and therefore would be something that is clearly detrimental to the housing market. So our suggestion is, rather than further open the market to foreigners, why don't we build more for our local consumption and make it more affordable following the median multiple calculation?
Okay, so I will go on to the next question. So the next one is by Ahmad Nizam. Okay, sorry, the question is moving. Ahmad Nizam Norali. His question is, should the government raise the PPR rental rate?
I think you've done this the calculation, Tiba, correct?
Yeah.
So I will you.
Based on one of the study by Dr. Shafiri, so he has estimated the maintenance cost of a PPR unit to be around 210 ringgit, but this was many years ago. The figure now, the maintenance fee should have maintenance cost could have risen, and if should the government raise the PPR rental rate, they should. So probably in our report we have recommended the implementation of life cycle costing. So with life cycle costing, then the government would be able to estimate the current cost of maintenance. So based on that, based on the maintenance cost, maybe they can raise the PPR rental rate to be equal to the maintenance cost or slightly higher. But this one, they also need to study the demographic profile of PPR residents, whether most of these residents can afford to pay the raised rental rate, and also come up with solutions. For example, maybe 70% of PPR households can afford the PPR rental rate, and maybe 20% or 10% are still earning very low income that cannot pay the raise. So what government can do, then they can give like further subsidy or housing vouchers that enable them to like to pay the remaining to pay the increment.
Agreed. Okay. So I will move on to the next one. So we have a question by Noor Hanizan Sahib. Do currently Currently, do affordable home buyers truly have housing affordability for home ownership, but particularly given the uncertainty of economic conditions? Anyone would like to take this?
If you look at the Adam's presentation just now, the affordability threshold is still at the moderately unaffordable for the whole of the country. So of course it is not affordable, particularly during the uncertainty economic condition. I don't know what you mean by this. Is it when people's money are being? I actually don't know what this means. Does it mean that you have no more income? I actually don't know what that means. But in terms of affordability, yes, it's not affordable.
Yeah, if I can add to that, yeah, a lot of the houses that are in the market, they're not quite affordable, and sometimes people think it's affordable because of financing, because they would just look at the monthly payments, but in total, based on the median multiple, it's way above that, and yeah, so sometimes they look at the monthly payments and they think it's affordable, but yeah, when it comes to uncertain economic conditions, sometimes like if we are hit with another pandemic or whatever economic crisis, then it turns out like these payments it's not affordable for them.
If I may give my input as well concerning Hanison's question, maybe one approach is to have a look at whether our PPR residents who can graduate are able to find a house that they can afford. And based on the analysis that we have done, we find that the answer is no. If you were to houses that let's say you cross the income criterion for being eligible for PPR unit, what these residents face is sort of like a benefit cliff. So the moment you go above a certain level of income, suddenly you lose all these benefits of being eligible for social protection and whatnot. And in that case, that puts you in a situation where I have to go to the private market to sort of either rent or even purchase a home. And we see that in the private market, there is a lack of affordability options, both in the rental market as well as in the sub-sale market. In the sub-sale market, in order for you to sort of like, the homes that you can afford are probably in a smaller than what you have in the PPRs, and you even have to pay a higher rental rate or mortgage payment for those housing units. So I guess the short answer is no. We sort of, at least in analyzing the Kuala Lumpur's housing market, there seems to be sort of like this gap in the middle.
Sorry, another thing I want to raise, like when it comes to housing affordability, it's not just about the monthly payments for the house itself. You also have to consider maintenance, and I think that's something, yeah, that should be of a concern as well, because sometimes you don't always know what exactly you have to pay for maintenance, and that's why we have things. That's why we've been proposing life cycle costing to make sure that the maintenance costs are truly transparent for people,
especially for stratified. We must have that in place.
I think I also want to add a little bit on this. So I guess when we talk about housing affordability, you want to know whether or not that housing is truly affordable. But sometimes when you make the housing affordable via financialization, meaning that you're only able to own the house because of a loan, so that is where it becomes an issue. So for example, in Hanisa's question on what happens given when it's a period of economic uncertainty, right? So we see this during the pandemic, where if your household mortgage is very high, but then suddenly you lost your job, so you can see where this precarity comes in, where you really have your households are really impacted. Hence, why the government introduced housing loan moratorium. So you can see how this really affects household when this whole housing unaffordability issue. So with that, I'll move on to the next question. So we have another question on Cyberjaya. Okay, so here is a question by Anonymous. What is your opinion on the lack of continuity on the policy to develop Cyberjaya, especially the focus of industry and investment?
Okay, but I do not have an exact answer for this, but in my opinion, if the vision is still true, like if we want to of the MSC to become a Silicon Valley, so then there should be something need to be done by the government, especially on the focus of industry and investment. Like they have to come up with strategies that can attract most of these innovative IT firms to locate in Cyberjaya. And now, given that some of the infrastructure has been improved and more residential centers are developed in Cyberjaya, and hopefully with correct strategies, then we'll be able to build that MSC cluster that it was envisioned.
Okay, so I will move on to the next one. Here is a question again by Anonymous. What policy initiatives can KRI suggest to avoid private sector low-cost housing projects from becoming an urban slum?
I guess I can take this one. In Adam's presentation just now, there is like a chart that demarcates social housing from the private sector. So I guess my view is that first of all, maybe the government can consider not doing private low-cost housing at all. If there is a need to serve the housing demand for a group of households who are perhaps struggling, then maybe rental options should be available for them. And in that sense, the government has the ability to sort of like shield deprived households from the greater, the full responsibilities that come with actually owning a house. And if management is under the control and the purview of the local state government, then I guess we won't see. You see the case with private low-cost homes, we have various different issues, right? Some aren't able to form the GMB, some cannot collect enough funds, some don't have enough people to sort of like ensure that the whole complex is in a livable condition. But these are not the same issues that you see under government managed PPRs, for example. So my view is to properly demarcate social housing versus what is available in the private market.
Can I add just a bit? Yes. For existing private sector low-cost housing that is currently turning into slum areas, one of the intervention. So because just now was what Greg mentioned was preventive measures. So don't build it ever again. Do not, unless the private sector wants to do CSR, meaning you build at the same time you manage this complex, because you can't expect poor household to manage complex 5 or 6 or 7 stories high with the little income they have. They just simply can't do it. So one is for the private sector to have a CSR business model for if you ever want to be in the social sector. So you must understand what you're getting yourself into, which is the social sector. Now, in terms of the existing private sector provisioning, I think there must be a dana, a fund from the government, unfortunately again, to have a proper building audit and see whether these homes can even last another 10 years or become, or is it going to be more deplorable to live in? Because what you don't want to have the other socio-economic negative effects of slum areas surrounding that area. So government intervention is needed when there's externalities, and clearly this is one, to maintain and make good of all these buildings, at the same time giving some funds for management or funding of the facilities.
Okay. So here we have a comment by Adriana Abu. So not a good idea, in fact, a very lazy solution to sell overhang expensive houses to foreigners when the ones slogging to advance this country is us Malaysians are being left out to hang dry.
Good comment.
So
Good comment.
yes, we agree, and I shall move on to the next one. So another question by Nur Hanizan. The questions are moving. Yes. How can your research contribute to fostering a better understanding of socioeconomic disparities and informed decision-making aimed at enhancing the overall well-being of communities?
What a question.
I can start.
Yes.
Yeah, so I guess one thing that we try to do is we try to go, when it comes to data, we try to go beyond averages, because when you go just with averages, it hides a lot of the disparities. So typically when we do our research, we always try to point to the disparities, and this can be in terms of geographical disparities, income disparities, as well as gender disparities. So I mean, that's one thing that we try to do. And yeah, so like recently, like the government, they publish the wage distribution by deciles, and that's and it seemed very impactful, and generally that's something that we try to do.
If I may add, in our analysis of place differentiation, as well as for this entire study, we tried to adopt an approach which allows us to look at things at a very, very granular level, up to the neighborhood level, or even in housing, we can do it up to the level of the chalan itself. Because we have mapped each SPA, each sales and purchase agreement to, we have assigned a geo coordinate for each SPA. So one of the things that can be done is also to have a greater understanding of what are the factors that drive social mobility. And long time ago, I think in KRI, I was involved in this social mobility study. And in that social mobility study, we ran some regressions, and we have found that it's mainly education and being in an urban area that sort of generates this sort of like this push for you to be upwardly mobile. But I think at that time, the variable urban is actually a binary variable. It's either you're in an urban area or a rural area, and sometimes urban, the definition of what it means to be urban, in turn, is based on built environment, population density, or economic activity. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's whether or not that area, 30% of which is agriculture. Yeah. But what we have recommended in our report is to see things at a more spectral level, as in you have a more continuous variables of what it means to be urban, and that one we can sort of like define and quantify via place differentiation, via the different diverse types of places that you might expect to see in an urban area. And I suspect, although we have not done this yet, I suspect that if you were to run analysis on these type of matrices, it would yield more valuable insights that can, that's more targeted as well. You can go down to the neighborhood level or whatever level that you wish, and sort of like run your interventions there.
Yes, I think this is very important. I think as a whole in KRI is that we do look at the macro household figures, income deciles, but at the end of the day, what makes informed public policy research is when you can really go at the granular level and understand communities as they emerge from that contextual deprivation. In that sense, most of our research tries to really go granular and understand what community needs, at the same time give very specific policy actions. I think this is one of the things that we try to do by doing it more granular.
Okay, thanks, Greg, Dr. Shreya and Adam. I'll go on to the next one. So here we have a question by Anonymous, which is quite a long one. We have a long-standing issue on the state of our currency that needs serious solution to solve the fact that our currency does not have good value. We can keep raising salaries, but raising salaries per se will not solve the issue that price of goods, especially houses, keeps going higher and higher beyond the reach of most salary hikes. In parallel with looking at more constructive salary hikes, which the current government is looking at along the lines of Singapore, and localizing most goods production to reduce imports of basic necessities, we need to address the fact that our ringgit has no value. Whatever we have been doing all these decades needs to stop ASAP, and we need an alternative method to ensure that our ringgit is strong. This is quite outside the scope of our discussion.
And
okay.
maybe I'll combine with the second question as well, because it's related to construction costs. But yeah, I mean, specifically on ringgit value, I guess it's relevant, but only if it affects construction costs. But if you look at the statistics, I mean, at least from the ones by NAPIC, it shows, CIDB, it shows that construction costs, it has not moved as much as how much our prices have increased. And we showed this back in our few publications ago. We showed that prices have doubled, but construction costs has nowhere increased that much. So it suggests that this difference, it's either suggests that developers are making more profit, or maybe the land prices are increasing too much, or maybe it could be a regulatory cost. But in terms of land costs, I would like to say that people often blame high prices to land costs, but I think we have to remember that the causality can actually run both ways. Rising house prices can result in rising land prices, because typically when the developer bids for the land, they're willing to pay more if they think that they can sell the house for a higher price. So I think we have to I think there are many factors here. As for reducing imports and localizing building costs, I mean, I guess that's something that could be done. But whether that's the priority, I mean, we have to look at the construction cost itself. Is it really an issue or not? And as far as corruption or whatever development charges, I guess from the limited data that we've seen, compliance costs, they're actually a small fraction of total development costs. And actually the cost for delays, the cost of delays, I think that has been somewhat addressed by improvements in the government. The one-stop portal.
Good answer.
Okay, so since we have reached 11, so I think we'll just answer the last two questions, if that's okay. So we have a question. Okay, there's another additional question. So we have a question on behalf of SR Ari Adam. Question to all of you, especially Dr. Suraya. If you are given the powers to make things right, what policy change would you do? Yes, what policy change would you do?
So if I may start, because it has my name there. I actually believe that all the work that KRI has done in terms of housing in cities are all backed by data. And we have had a very good partnership with all the relevant stakeholders. And when we actually did Dasar Perumahan Negara, it had some really gold nuggets in there that I thought the policies would ensure a better or more affordable housing sector for the total population of Malaysia with good living, good housing and amenity standards. I think what is needed is the political will to execute all these policies. I shall stop there.
Okay.
Okay. And that's from my side. If on place differentiation, if I have the powers to make things right, one of the things that I would try to do is I would try to maybe reduce the population density in the heart of Kuala Lumpur, and maybe make different neighbourhoods have higher level of density. And in so doing, I believe that would sort of like be the necessary conditions for place differentiation to sort of increase in the more rural areas. So I think of it as sort of spreading this prosperity across different areas of the Kuala Lumpur, and making sure that all the different neighborhoods have access to job options, to leisure options, to mobility options. That's me.
Okay, so the final two, I guess. So this one by Anonymous. In reality, the income bracket of the people reflects the location, which means the people makes the place, but the B40 makes the place run. What do you think?
Can I take this first, and then my colleagues will ask?
Sure.
I love this question because who serves the city if not key workers? And who are the key workers? These are the ones that sweeps the floors, cater for your canteen, working in your grocery shops, 99 Speed Mart, and they need to be near in the city because they service the city. And we need to have these people around. But if these key workers are shoot out to the periphery of a city, that makes the city does not work. So yes, the B40 makes the place run. That's why we need to ensure that they too have a decent standard of living, with it, of course, following each other's functions or capabilities. Carry on.
Sorry, right. Yeah. And I think oftentimes a lot of these key workers, they tend to be foreigners, and you know, whatever issues that they're facing, we tend to keep close our eyes. So yeah, I think that's something that should be addressed as well.
I think a big part of our study, initially when we had thought about it, we at least for me, my hypothesis was that in the heart of KL, you would see all the rich people agglomerate, and then in the more rural areas, you would have the not so rich agglomerate, right? But what we actually discovered is that Greater Kuala Lumpur is an inclusive city. The rich and the poor, or the not so rich, actually all stay in the same area.
Okay, so there's another question here. Do you think we have enough houses to cater for Malaysia plus the immigrants? Anyone wants to answer this one?
If we're just talking about the number of houses, I guess sure, yeah, we do have enough, but whether it's actually fitting for our needs, you know, in terms of the quality, is it not dilapidated, or yeah, they're well taken care of? I think that probably no, and also the affordability as well.
Okay. So there's a comment by Teolin Sen, this should be live on TV. I hope so, but thank you.
It's all on Facebook.
Okay, I know I said just now was supposed to be the last one, but there's another question slipped in, so I'll just ask this one, yeah? So the last question by Anonymous, the profit margins are being hiked up without any control. Dr. Sraya is correct that we need political will and less of pandering to developers' whims and whinings and perpetual greed. Wow, okay, quite, this is a comment only. So I guess if this is a comment, if anyone wants to, okay, no, perhaps any final remarks before I conclude?
I'd just like to say maybe I'd like to thank everybody that has participated in our Facebook Live, because the more we understand each other and the social economic differentiation or problems we have in the cities, the more all of us could then advocate or lobby for more inclusive cities. So I'm very happy that people are coming today. Thank you. And do come for our next session, which is the financialization of our lives in November. So that's another thing that I think it will be good, because what we want is for more people to understand what we're trying to say. I know sometimes it's a bit technical, but we do try to make it less technical so that everybody understands our starting point, our premise, and what are the policy options. So yes, thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you very much.
All right, so as all good things must come to an end, it is now the end of our webinar session. On behalf of KRI, thank you so much everyone for attending our webinar, Rich Places, Poor Places, Managing the Realities of Neighbourhoods. If you like discussions on pressing issues of the nation, we would like to invite you to join and follow KRI on our social media platforms. Thank you for joining us and have a great day.